Good morning, everyone. So last time we discussed about interface, inheritance, encapsulation, abstract class, and polymorphism, like this one. Now, let's proceed now to what we call the exception handling. Okay, before we do that, let's create another file. Okay, then next. Then let's name this Arduino module 8. Okay. Oh. Okay, then it's finished. Oops. Okay, now let's proceed to the code. Okay, here guys, as you can see, we use the most prepared way on initializing an array. The square bracket comes before A, okay, here. But in your module, you can see that A comes first before the square bracket. So this is more prepared way on initializing your array rather than what I type on your module. But it's also working properly. But the more prepared way is to declare like this. So we can tell that this is an array. We are initializing an array. Okay. So now let's proceed on typing. So here, guys, as you can see, try catch is used to know if the code is not working properly. Like on this one, guys, we initialize a size that has only 2. Okay, that an array that can hold only 2 values. But here, oh my guys, as you can see, we want to have a value for our index array number 5, but as you can see here in your initialization, we can only store 2 values. A value on index number 5, which is, if we're going to analyze, this is an incorrect code. Why? We only have 2. Like for an analogy, we only have 2 bottles, but we want to have a 5th bottle to have a water. So that is an incorrect syntax. So ngayon, guys, we have what we call exception. Now, if we have an error, this will tell you that your code has an error. This is what we call exception. Everything that you write on your try code will be analyzed if there's an incorrect statement, and if there's an incorrect statement, this one will catch the error, okay, and will return you a display which is an error occurred. Now, what will happen after we print an error occurred? Now, this is the last syntax here in our code, which is finally, which returns that the code is done, meaning analyzing the code is done. Okay, meaning whatever happens, finally will always print. Okay, so this is the syntax where we use to analyze if your code is working properly, especially for those that are testing or debugging. They use try-catch to analyze if there's an error in your code. Okay, like this one. Okay. So, naglagay tayo ng maximum size of 2, but we want to have a value on your number 5, or in your index number 5, you want to have a value of something, okay, of 0. You want to have a value of 0 on your container number 5, okay, which is incorrect because we only have 2 container and you want to put a value on your container number 5. That's incorrect. So let's run the code. So you can see that there is an error on your code. Okay, as what I've said, there's an error occurred. Now, after analyzing that code, there's finally display which is done. Okay, now if we change this to 1, because array always start with 0, right? For example, container number, we have index 0, index 1, index 2, 3, and so on. Now, if we put 2 here, there is still an error, okay? Because we're starting from container 0, then 1, 2, 3. So, if we have 2 here, then that means that we have index 0 and index 1 na pwede nating lagyan ng laman. Okay? That's why, if we put 2 here and we want to put a value of 0 in your index number 2, then an error will also occur. So that's it. So if we run this code, still there's an error, okay? So now, let's have this 1, okay? So there's no error, but you have a value of 0. Why? Because you didn't declare what a value should have for your index number 1. So there are still an error. Okay, now that we are done here, let's remove this code. Let's discuss now about throw exception. Okay, so let's type the code. Okay, so I just added here some print, so you can see the output of our work. So now here we have 2 parameter, which is integer a and integer b. Now we have a throw exception, which is arithmetic exception, which analyze if your input value is division by 0. So for example, we have a value of 0 in our variable b. So now the one that we have here is we'll have an arithmetic exception division by 0. So it will throw you an exception, which means that you cannot have a value of 0 in your variable b. Now, if we divide a divided by b, then it will return the value of those variable. So, for example, now, guys, we have b. If b is equal to 0, then it will throw an exception that it is division by 0. Now, if you run this code, so your output will be number 1, and there's no error, right? Because, guys, you put number 2 on your variable b. And the condition is if b is equal 0, then it will throw an arithmetic exception, which is division by 0. But because this is not 0, so the output will be the one that is divided on your variable A and variable B. Okay. So now if we change this 1 into 0, which cannot be because that is division by 0, now it will throw an exception which is division by 0, like this one. So this one is created because of your code. It throws an arithmetic exception because of this throw exception. Okay, so that is what we call throw exception. So we have discussed try, catch, finally, and throw exception. Now let's proceed to other codes that we must know. Okay, so before we do that, let's remove these codes. Okay, so we will be having a new code that will analyze multiple catch. Okay, so but before that, we need to type that code before we can run it. Now let's type the code for the multiple catch exception. Okay, so first we declare here an integer that has a size of 10, only 10 guys, meaning you can only have an index from 0 to 9. And an analogical explanation, you can only have a container from 0 to 9 container. Now here, as you can see guys, we put a container or index number 10 right here, but as I've said a while ago, you can only have an index number 0 to 9 to have a value, because if you start with 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 9, that has a size of 10. But here we had a container number 10, which is another incorrect code. Now let's have a catch that will hold that error, which tells that it is division by 0. Another one, we will have another catch exception, which will throw array index out of bound, meaning, guys, the error is that aside from divisible by 0, which if we put 0 on your value, then it will have a division by 0 error. The another error that will come is that if you have index number 10, which you can only have 0 to 9, this will be your another error. Okay, so there's two error. First, it is not divisible by 0. Another error is that you want to put a value on container number 10. Even container number 10, it does not exist. Okay, so if you run this code, the first catch will be your output. Now, for example, put here 1, then the first catch will be ignored. And if you run the code, so the next error will be read, okay, which is array index out of bound, meaning your array is out of bound because 10 does not exist, but still you put a value on your index number 10. Okay, so that's the multiple catch. Okay, so if you have a lot of errors, then it will read one by one, starting from the first catch up to the second catch. But here, because catch it's not visible by 0, then it will go to the next error, which is array out of bound. Now let's talk about the check and uncheck exception. Now first, let's remove these codes. I hope you understand this multiple catch. I know that it is not included in your module. That's why I added here in your video tutorial, so you can analyze and know how to use catch or multiple catch checking your exception. Okay, now let's type the code. So here, I use different code, guys. I use interrupt exception for check exception. Okay, so yan, okay. So here, guys, so we declare a long start, which holds the time milliseconds of your runtime. Okay. Now it tells us that the thread will sleep for 2 seconds. If you run the code, it will not print sleep time. Okay, guys, it will not print the output, no, until you reach 2 seconds because we put here 2. Okay, 2000, meaning that's 2 seconds. So if you run the code, you will count 1, then 2. Now, then saka na lang ipiprint yung output. Okay, let's run it again. So you can feel it. 1, 2. Okay, dun sa pangalawa, sa pang 2 seconds, saka lang siya mag-a-appear. So this is what we call check exception. Okay. This is one best example, which is interrupted exception. So when you interrupt niya ng for 2 seconds, it will sleep for 2 seconds, then will resume the code after 2 seconds. Resume running the code. Now let's proceed to uncheck exception, which will be the last topic of this discussion. But let's remove this first. I hope you understand this simple code. This is given in your Java program, meaning this is a reserve word used in Java conditions like this one, in interrupted exception, which holds or which counts the seconds of your running time. Okay, this is the current time milliseconds. So let's remove this code, and then let's add a code for your uncheck exception. Now let's type a code with uncheck exception. So here we just put a variable, an input of 7, and then here we try to divide that value into 0, which means it has already an error, but this is an unchecked. Okay, guys, meaning if you run this, there are still an error, but as you can see, guys, we did not put this print. Okay, so meaning hindi tayo yung nagtalaga ng print na ito. Automatically nagde-debug naman talaga si Java. So in your unchecked exception, it will read the error without trying to catch it. Okay, so automatically mababasa niya na may error dun sa code nyo because we cannot divide 7 to 0. That's why it will automatically have an arithmetic division by 0, or divisible by 0. So that ends our discussion. I hope you understand the exception handling. So next meeting, we will discuss on your module 9. Okay, that will be the last topic of our discussion. And then we will have your assessment tasks. Yung mga susunod po na module, like from module 10 hanggang sa module 18, I think, dun sa inyong second quarter, yun po ay di-discuss na natin sa third quarter kasi hindi na kayo aabot kasi mag-a-assessment task na. So I hope you understand. If you have any questions, just PM me, guys, regarding this exception handling. Thank you for listening. So for additional learning, so guys, we have we have other check exceptions and uncheck exception. Like for this one, We can identify kung yung class is not existing because of class not found exception. We can also, especially we can use this kapag sobrang dami na ng classes ninyo and you don't know kung ano yung mga names na nalagay ninyo sa kanila. So, you can use this exception to identify if that class is not found. Another one is illegal access exception. So, for example, you have a private private declaration on your class. So, meaning that will have an illegal access exception. Another one, yung initiation exception. So, if you attempt to create an object of an abstract class or an interface class that is not declared in your code, then you will have an initiation or instantiation exception. Another one, if the method does not exist, then you will have a no such method exception. So, for example, you type add record method and it's not included, but you want to print anything that includes in your add record, but it's not exist, then you will have a no such method exception. And lastly, this is what we discussed, the interrupted exception. Now, we also have unchecked exception, guys. So, kagaya nung kanina, we use arithmetic exception. Okay? Kahit hindi natin siya i-define, guys, in your exceptions, automatically, Java compiler will read that and will give you an error that we cannot divide it by 0. Another one is the array out of bound exception. So, yan. So, automatically, madedetect niya rin ito, okay, in your unchecked exception. Next is array stored exception. Okay, kung yung data type naman does not match, you declared it double, but you print it long. So, you will have an array store exception for that one. And then another one is input mismatch exception. If you enter a value na for integer, you cannot put a double. Okay? For example, enter number 1 and you put 1.1 and that is a mismatch exception. Okay? And then another one is null pointer exception, meaning invalid use of null references. Ibig sabihin, kagaya nung kanina, pilit natin nilalagyan ng value yung variable A. Hindi naman natin siya inilagay. Hindi naman natin siya i-declare. Ang dineclare lang natin ay B and C, pero pilit natin nilalagyan yung A. So, that is null pointer exception. Next one is the number format exception. Ito naman yung conversion. So, for example, you have a format of number, but you want to put a string. So, that is invalid conversion of a string to a numeric format. So, meaning you need to have a proper conversion before you can put a string value to a numeric format. And then lastly, we have the string index out of bound exception. So, meaning accessing an invalid index, you are accessing a variable or you are accessing index number 10 even it does not exist because you only initialize 0 to 9 and you want to access number 10. So that will be an string index out of bound exception. So that's it. I hope you understand it right.